If you know anything about me, you'll know that I'm a CarolKnighter. This was me the day before deltarune release, confidently explaining a silly schizo theory I had that, if true, would serve as evidence towards Carol being the Roaring Knight. Even going into Chapter 5, I was under the assumption that Carol would likely end up being revealed as the Roaring Knight. Not in Chapter 5, of course, just in general. However, upon playing through Chapter 5 and seeing Asgore's actions, his desires, his, well, you know what, I came to doubt my previous beliefs. The nail in the coffin for me, though, was this line from Asgore. Nothing about CarolKnight made sense to me after this. So, if I wasn't to believe CarolKnight, I had to believe something else. First though, I think it would be somewhat proper for me to explain why CarolKnight pre-Chapter 5. I'll keep this short and simple. It just made sense. Sure, there were those who cried red herring, but there was no genuine evidence against Carol. Plus, she'd have a pretty self-explanatory motive, finding Des. I wasn't exactly sure how to express how Carol would end up doing so without me just writing straight up fanfic, but I felt it had the potential to weave an interesting narrative. So, I went with it. Which is why I was so averse to DessKnight. It just felt like it was forcing a blank canvas in front of the player and telling them to write their own stories, and not in the way Gerson tells Alvin to. It felt too broad, too vague, too easy almost. She was just too easy to accuse because we knew nothing about her. Any stupid, crazy theory you had about the Knight could simply be projected onto her with ease since she was such an enigma. I also simply felt that the mystery behind Des's disappearance, her disappearance, was a completely separate one from that of the Knight's identity. The two existed in completely different worlds in my mind, and trying to bring them together would be like trying to convince a diehard Curdly fan that Trucies is where it's at. So that's the general gist of why, pre-Chapter 5, I fully believed CarolKnight. With that laid out, I think now is a good time to ask, what changed? Well, a lot. Even though the Knight only appeared for like a minute before dipping with Asgore and leaving behind a dead flowery, there's still a lot we can make of their actions. Okay, maybe not so much the Knight's actions actually. Asgore is the key to the puzzle here. Kind of. As you know, Carol is heavily implied to be the sole factor in keeping Asgore's shop afloat, financially speaking at least. Not only that, but Carol's also stated to be directly backing Asgore's you-know-what. With the release of Chapter 5, we now know that Asgore's you-know-what is an investigation into Dark Worlds, and he isn't just doing it out of curiosity either. Asgore is looking into Dark Worlds because of some unnamed incident that, at the time of its occurrence, he knew couldn't have been his fault. He knew there was something supernatural at play. This incident is what caused Asgore to be kicked off the police force, and more than likely the event that caused Des to go missing. With all that laid out, I have a question for you. Why, if Carol was the Roaring Knight, would she actively fund the man who's trying to parade the body of whoever's opening the fountains around town? And why, if Carol wanted to find her missing daughter again, would she sabotage the man who's trying to help her do just that by kidnapping him? That is what didn't make sense to me. The fact Carol and Asgore are engaged in a mutually beneficial agreement, yet Carol would just throw it all away after all the time and resources she put into Asgore, the woman who, as the mayor, would likely be very selective with how she spends her time, would just throw it all away for whatever knightly desires call to her. I was planning on dedicating a whole section as to how CarolKnight can still win, but now that I'm actually writing the script, I realize just how unrealistic it is, honestly. I'll just say it now. The only way CarolKnight can still win is if Carol is a walking contradiction. The only way CarolKnight can still win is if Carol putting all this effort into Asgore and his research was all part of her grand scheme as the Knight. If all the funding and resources she gave to Asgore was just to have him let down his guard. After all, it's not like Carol as the Knight would really be able to do much with whatever data Asgore finds, so she wouldn't be using him for his research or anything. So why would Carol go to such lengths just to kidnap Asgore when there would be much easier and more effective ways to do so with her power as the mayor? None of it makes sense. CarolKnight has been found shot dead in an alley. RudyKnight is almost as dead as Rudy himself, and asrielknight is just... okay, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just stupid. And I better not see a single comment talking about some- wait, Shabuka, hear me out on Papyrus Knight, shut up! Listen, do you understand how painful it was for me to think this all up, to type this all out, to speak all of this into my microphone, knowing full well what I'm building up to? I am building up to something that goes against the very foundation of my channel, the very foundation of my existence and presence as a deltarune YouTuber. I'm gonna say it. I think I am now a DessKnighter. It genuinely hurt my soul to come to this, but at the moment I believe this is the most reasonable conclusion, just like what CarolKnight was to me before Chapter 5, and I want to explain all of it in detail. Not specifically the logistics of Des herself being the Knight, but rather what this means for Carol and who she works with. For one, I don't think Carol, aka the suspicious caller, works for the Knight. Assuming Asgore's interests overlap with Carol's own, Carol and the Knight very much have different motives, seeing as Asgore wants the Knight slimed the f*** out. Secondly, Okay, actually there's not really a secondly, I just want to take this time to address Chris's relationship chart, because with Carol no longer working alongside the knight, again, even as a suspicious caller, Chris's connections get a little confusing to say the least. So I was kind enough to make you this cute little diagram. Aren't I so thoughtful? As you can see, Chris is allied with 3 parties. The Fun Gang, consisting of mainly Susie and Ralsei, the Desk Searchers, consisting of Asgore and Carol, and, well, the Knight. Side note, I was totally gonna refer to this as something to do with triple Trucies, but there's already like at least 4 other theories that have done that, all of which pertain to Chris and their confidants, so I'm not gonna do that actually. This theory doesn't have a name because I'd prefer it be untitled rather than lame and boring and basic. Anyways, I'll start from what appears to be the allegiance of theirs that they hold highest, that of the Knights. Chris, when out of her control, seems to prioritize this relationship of theirs over all others. At the end of chapter 5, they attempt to rip up the paper containing one of the codes to the shelter, demonstrating that they see serving the Knight as both more important than helping Susie and more important than maintaining whatever they've got going on with Carol and Asgore, seeing as, well, tearing up this code would kind of leave Asgore for dead in the shelter. Maybe not for dead, but there's a 95% chance he's totally fucked. That being said though, the next most important allegiance of Chris's seems to be the one they share with Carol and Asgore, as in chapter 4, we see them directly prioritize the orders of the suspicious caller over that of, well, Susie wanting to rid of Noelle by playing various doohickey chords. So in order of how much they prioritize the alliance, Chris's Truces would line up like so. This isn't to say that they don't care about Susie or Ralsei, but they've definitely got priorities. Before I close this out, I'd like to take this time to highlight the fact that there's a considerable amount of in-game text and subtext that suggests this version of triple Trucies. It also adds a lot of intrigue narrative-wise. Carol is most likely searching for her daughter, while Asgore, well, was searching for the maker of the fountains. Then, somehow, Carol came to the conclusion that Des was lost to or in the Dark Worlds, and thus she hired Asgore onto the case. As I mentioned earlier, Asgore basically downright states that whatever went down both had something to do with the Dark World and was the event that got him kicked off the police force. Additionally, it most likely has something to do with Des. Des went missing because something went horribly wrong with a dark fountain. Doesn't that sound like the perfect recipe for downright disaster? Perhaps one that could forge a being like the Roaring Knight? I don't know. I don't have a great segue to the conclusion, so we'll just close this out like normal. I'm honestly still not quite sure where I now stand on the whole Knight debate. When I first made a community post about my predicament, many people expressed their woes of losing motivation to even consider who the Knight may be, which I found to be a tad disheartening. I really love theorizing about this stuff, and while I may not have a firm belief at the moment, seeing as I found DessKnight about as desirable as Birdly for over a year, I think it may be better that way. I now don't see myself potentially going, no, what? Were the Knight to be revealed as Des. At the same time though, I think I would pop off to some degree if the Knight is Carol. This video is mostly just here to serve as food for thought, and, well, a coming out of sorts? Not that kind though, it isn't Pride Month anymore. Anyways, I think I'll leave it off there. Be sure to like and hype if you enjoyed, and consider subscribing. I make monthly Deltarune videos like this, so I have a lot to say about this game, especially with the drop of a new chapter. With that, thanks a bunch for watching, and until next time, peace.